Welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service for March 11th, 2020. We have a couple options for you to further research your weather after this broadcast is over. We have a 1-800 number that you can get into a menu system and further refine your search for your area. Also, we have a web page for you at weather.gov/Alaska. And if you take off Alaska and put in Juneau, Anchorage, or Fairbanks, you can further refine your search to better suit your needs. And lastly, if you want to contact us via email, we provide an email there listed at the bottom. If you have any questions about this broadcast or anything we do at the Weather Service, please don't hesitate to contact us. I thought I'd throw in the February climate summary for Southeast Alaska. You can see that for many locations across the Panhandle, Haines was the only location with a slightly below normal temperature reading for the month. They were almost 4 degrees below normal, but otherwise all of the other locations across the Panhandle were slightly above normal. Otherwise, the precipitation on the bottom graph, Yakutat was the only one that was slightly below normal for precipitation. Otherwise, all the other locations, Haines, Juneau, Petersburg, Sitka, and Ketchikan, were slightly above normal in a wet month for Southeast Alaska. So let's take a look at the hazardous weather map for the state of Alaska. We have lots of warnings out. We also have a little warning here for wind chill advisories tonight till Thursday morning for White Pass. We're expecting wind chill values to get there to -35. Otherwise, we have winter storm warnings out for much of the Brooks Range and North Slope for Thursday morning through Saturday morning, and even portions of the bottom or lower end of the Noatak Valley there, Kotzebue, Ambler, Ambler's out of it, but that area in the north, in the Bering Strait coast and extreme western portions of the Seward Peninsula and Gamble, St. Lawrence Island, we have winter storm warnings again for the blizzard conditions with snow and blowing snow. Much of this area could receive anywhere between 8 and 12 inches of snowfall, and again with strong winds associated with the system coming over the next couple days. What does this all look like in the satellite? I'll set that in motion. You can see that there's that developing system that will be causing all those winds across the northwest and across the north slope. Otherwise, pretty nice weather across much of the southern mainland with high pressure dominating that area. Otherwise, we have a weak front here showing up near southeast Alaska, spreading scattered snow showers in that area. And we have this other system developing. There's a warm front approaching into the Gulf. And otherwise, we did note some scattered snow showers across much of the western area that we'll see on the surface map here shortly. But otherwise, generally clouds moving across and low clouds with onshore flow across the north slope there. So today's weather map looked like this. Again, there's those scattered snow showers, high pressure across much of the southern mainland, 1050 millibars. That has effects on pilots' altimeter settings, so be cognizant of that, pilots out there. Very high pressure across much of the southern mainland. We have a weak frontal boundary across southeast Panhandle with scattered snow showers and even rain showers showing up there just on the southern end of the Panhandle. We did analyze a 1028 millibar low just off the coast there. There's that warm front spreading some rain showers in the Gulf and clouds spreading out ahead of that system. And again, there's that system that's going to be coming on into the weather picture for us here, beginning actually tonight with that 961 millibar low in extreme eastern Russia, occluded front with the snow showers and rain showers through the western portions of the Aleutians and scattered snow showers, and again strong southerly flow across much of the region through the Bering Sea and into the northwest and out through the Arctic coast. Again, that high pressure stays with us. pilots be wary of that. This is tomorrow morning. And again, that low pressure system continues to develop weak snow showers across the Panhandle, otherwise rain and even some snow showers across the Gulf of Alaska. Thursday weather looks like, again, that system's going to be approaching. Strong winds associated with that, blizzard conditions, scattered snow showers, otherwise very strong winds, again, along that stationary bounding warm front out ahead of that. But 1052 millibar high now on Thursday's weather, and it actually clears out, but strong winds with likely outflow winds for many of the basins there and across the southern mainland, outflow winds there, but otherwise scattered snow showers still in the southern end of the Panhandle, otherwise stationary front through the Gulf. And then for Friday's weather, that system finally breaks down but continues to produce scattered snow showers across the YK Delta and the Seward Peninsula and then through the northwest coast. Again, there's that blowing snow, strong winds, southerly winds through much of that area. Rain showers in the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, high pressure continues to dominate for Friday. 1048 and 1051 millibar high. And again, strong winds probably for the Panhandle with the pressure gradients there. For low temperatures Thursday morning, we'll be looking at minus 30s across portions of the Arctic coast there. UAFTV, minus 25, northwest coast in the teens and low 20s. And as you get down to the Seward Peninsula, zeros and single digits, minus 8 there in Kotzebue, minus 37, looks like it's going to be the cold overnight temperature there, and at Arctic Village and Attuva Pass, minus 23, minus 25 at Fort Yukon, Eagle, minus 24, Fairbanks, minus 14, and then as you get down into Galena, looks like minus 7, and through the southwest, YK Delta, looking at single digits and maybe even zero readings there. As you get into the Bristol Bay region, single digits, but as you get out through the Alaska Peninsula and down through the Aleutians, 20s and even 30s, taking a peek at the southeast and coastal areas, Kodiak 19, Cordova 10, Yakutat 17, Haines Skagway 12, teens in that area. Otherwise upper 20s and 30 for the rest of the Panhandle. For Thursday afternoon, temperatures warm up to the teens, single digits along the north slope. Otherwise 20s across the northwest, single digits and below readings there in portions of the eastern interior. Fairbanks 11, Eagle 5, and Northway 6. Otherwise 20s across much of the southwest and Seward Peninsula, and then 35 there at Kodiak and Bristol Bay region, 20s and teens, and then 30s again, even 40s out there at Attu. And then Kodiak 35 again, Cordova 29, 30 for Yakutat, Haines Skagway in the 20s, and 30s across the rest of the Panhandle. For Friday morning, we'll be looking at single digits across much of the Arctic coast and teens across the northwest, otherwise minus 20 there at Arctic Village. Looks like it's going to be the cold reading for the state. Fort Yukon minus 7, minus 8 at Eagle, otherwise teens across much of the southwest and in the Seward Peninsula. Anchorage will be 5, it looks like, Kenai 2, Kenai Soldotna, and then Homer 8, Cordova 20, single digits in the Bristol Bay area, and then teens as you warm up going down the Alaska Peninsula, and 20s and 30s as you get out the chain. But otherwise, looking at teens for the Panhandle, 11 there in Skagway, Ketchikan 17, Sitka 19, and Yakutat 15. For Friday afternoon, we're looking at 20s across the North Slope and 20s across much of the state with 23 in Fairbanks, 18 in Eagle, and then 26 in Anchorage, Juneau 23, Kodiak 38, and then 20s through Bristol Bay, 30s through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Chain.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather for Thursday morning. Around a big high pressure ridge here in south central, we're going to be seeing onshore flow across the Seward Peninsula and portions of the western Brooks Range for Thursday morning, bringing IFR to marginal VFR conditions. Up in that region of the state, along a occluded front, there's going to be some IFR conditions out there in the western Aleutians. That pattern continues into Thursday afternoon, IFR conditions across the western Brooks Range and into the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR conditions across much of the rest of the state as I back away. And then we have, along the stationary front, continued IFR conditions out there and into the Bering Sea. And then Friday morning, we're going to be looking at continued IFR conditions along this frontal boundary here with in the Bering Sea and across much of the Aleutians. Marginal VFR conditions across portions of the Alaska Range and along the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coast. Friday afternoon, again, that stationary boundary stays with us. It's weakening, falling apart by now, and continued IFR conditions along that boundary across much of the Bering and into these extreme western portions of the Seward Peninsula and marginal conditions across the coastal areas of the Arctic. Past conditions for Thursday, AKwx, marginal early, VFR early, marginal later in the day, same for Adigan. And then past conditions for Lake Clark down the Alaska Range, VFR conditions, good flying weather down along much of the Alaska Range. Rainy Pass, VFR, windy, VFR, Isabel, VFR conditions. Mentasta, same thing. Dehne, VFR conditions. Portage, VFR. Chilkoot and White, they even get VFR conditions down there in the Panhandle. Freezing levels, you can see that stationary front out there bringing elevated freezing levels out in the Bering and along the western Aleutians up to 8,000 feet in those portions of the state. And then surface conditions across portions of the Panhandle, otherwise coming down into the Gulf of Alaska there with other elevated areas down there in the central Gulf for Thursday morning. Icing conditions below 8,000 feet across much of the northwest there and across portions of the southeast below 9,000 but above 3,000 in that area. For the jet stream, 120 knot winds coming off of Japan and into the Pacific, and then as you get into extreme eastern Russia, 140 knots there, and then back into Alaska, 120 knots and the northerly winds there. And then portions of the southern Panhandle, 115 knots as you get into Canada, and around this low, 90 knots as you get into the Oconus, I'm sorry. And then around this low, 90 knots in the Pacific there, in the central Pacific, around that big high pressure ridge again. For 9,000 foot winds, there's that big ridge, 10, 20, even 40 knots across the western portions of the mainland, and then 20, 30 knots across the borderline there, and then across the southeast, 20 to 40 knots across the Panhandle. And then Aleutians, again, they had anywhere from 30 to 40 knots. As you get into the Bering, you get into the 60 knots. The strongest winds, again, across the extreme eastern Russia with 80 knots at 9,000 foot. For 3,000 foot level, we're going to be looking at, again, that ridge of high pressure, weak winds around that area in the south central and portions of the southwest Alaska. But as you get into the northwest there, 50, 75 knots as you get into Bering Strait. Arctic coast, 50 knots, and then weak conditions down along the border, and then 10 to 20 knots as you get into the Panhandle. And then out in the Bering, 30 to 40 knots, portions of the Aleutians. For turbulence, we're going to be looking at below 2,000 feet associated with that strong onshore flow again for Thursday with considerable moderate conditions in portions of that area. Below 5,000 feet with a strong outflow winds across the mountains and in through the passes. below 5,000 feet there, but otherwise cross solutions below 3,000 feet there, with isolated to scattered areas of considerable moderate. We'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6,
It's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2.
That countdown you just heard? We'll get back to that in a minute. Last episode, we saw the epic launch of ICESat-2, NASA's newest state-of-the-art ice-observing satellite. But now that that's in orbit, the pressure to deliver results is on.
Between launch and, the first ground returns, took 17, 18 days or something like this. It's a time when you're quite nervous.
9 years ago, Dr. Torsten Marcus took over as the lead project scientist for ICESat-2 during a time when the mission needed a champion.
You start fighting for a mission over, for 9 years now.
So when ICESat-2 was turned on for the first time 18 days after it was launched, only then would the science team know if the whole thing had worked. And it did.
First of all, it's kind of emotional, right? Being here, ICESat-2 was developing for 9-10 years. Rocket scientist, you live the mission, right?
If it sounds like there's a lot of noise in the background, that's because Torsten is being interviewed from a plane 1,500 feet in the air. IceBridge was tasked with the job of bridging the data between the end of ICESat's mission and the beginning of ICESat-2, about a 9-year difference.
The goal is that it would run until ICESat-2 launched and then would have overlap with ICESat-2 as well, so we can get a really long, well-calibrated time series from IceBridge.
As the deputy project scientist for Operation IceBridge, Brick works closely with Torsten to make sure the two missions are syncing up.
The timing was everything during that mission, which was a real challenge because not only do we need to...
Basically what you need to take away is getting an airplane and a satellite in space to fly over the same flight path at the same time and collect matching data is really, really hard. IceBridge was tasked with two objectives. Check the accuracy of ICESat-2's data over land ice and over sea ice. They were able to lock in the land ice data fairly quickly in the mission, but the sea ice data...
It was really tricky. We waited day after day. Do we fly the sea ice? It's still on our list.
7, 6,
It's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2, 1. Mark on the overpass 0435, 35 Zulu.
Here's what just happened. A plane 1,500 feet up and a satellite 308 miles up measured the same sea ice at the same time. This moment finally linked veteran mission Operation IceBridge's data to that of its new sister mission, ICESat-2. Two projects that, until now, were separate for nearly 10 years.
It's a very satisfying feeling because you do something that is meaningful and in the bigger picture. And yeah, it's very satisfying.
Our search for knowledge doesn't end here. Grace Follow-On and ICESat-2, the two satellite missions that launched this year, will continue to bring in incredible data for the foreseeable future. The steady drumbeat of campaigns in the field goes on, but most of all, the people who look for answers will never stop searching. And from our perspective, it's pretty clear why. What is your favorite planet in the solar system?
My favorite planet is the planet Earth.
What? Earth? Really?
The Earth, obviously.
Favorite planet in the solar system? Earth, right? We live on it. It's a really important one.
Favorite planet is Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Why?
when you look out at the other planets, they're absolutely fascinating. They've got all sorts of interesting systems going on. They've got dust storms. But then when you're on another planet, looking back at Earth, I mean, it's just incredible.
Whenever you go in different places, it looks So different, so amazing. It's just, I love planet Earth. It's just a very special planet. This is our home.
We've seen things far beyond the solar system. But even with all that, even the amazing things we've seen, one of the most amazing is the Earth itself.
It's got to be Earth. It's got to be Earth.
It's got to be here. I like the polar regions up here, of Earth. Yeah, sorry. It's very boring.
Earth is good.
Earth is good.
We live here, it sustains our life.
I'm not going to turn my back on it.
It's got water, it's got ice, it's got vegetation. I mean, it's rich with life. And so studying Earth is a very, very rewarding career. And I think if we were on any other planet, we would be trying to get to Earth as quickly as we could.
Back to the marine forecast, let's take a look at the sea ice analysis for March 11th. Pretty good extensive sea ice coverage there with slightly above normal sea ice, pack ice there in the Bering Sea. Big changes are in store with this next system coming on shore. Strong southerly winds are going to be pushing this ice edge north by about 60 nautical miles by next Monday is what we're estimating. Otherwise, decreasing ice concentrations in the Cook Inlet. We're going to be looking at Thursday's marine forecast for southeast. Winds generally out of the north, 15 to 40 knots across the inside waters with gales up there in the Lynn Canal with gusts of 55. Otherwise, outside waters generally from the northeast at 15 to 20, 25 knots. Otherwise, along the North Gulf, winds generally from the east, 20 to 30, seas as high as 9 feet just off the coast there. And for Friday, looking at winds inside waters generally from the north or northeast, 25 to 30 knots, gusts to 45 there in the Lynn Canal area. Otherwise, outside waters generally from the northeast at 30 knots, seas as high as 9 feet. Along the North Gulf, winds generally from the north or west, 15 to 20 depending on where you're going to be. For South Central, the winds generally from the north with small craft advisory looks like for much of the region on Thursday. Winds generally from 20 to 25 knots, seas as high as 8 feet just in the North Gulf there. Otherwise, through the Cook Inlet, winds generally from the north, 10 to 25 knots there. And for Friday, winds switch around from the west, generally 10 to 10 knots. Otherwise, the southern area there from the northeast at 10 knots. Cook Inlet generally from the northeast, 10 to 15 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the northeast at 20 to 25 knots. Just off the Kodiak Island, winds generally from the northeast there at 30 knots, seas as high as 9 feet. Southern side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds generally from the northeast at 30 knots, even on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, 30 knots, and Bristol Bay region, northeasterly at 15 knots. For Friday, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the east, 15 to 25 knots. Southern side of the Alaska Peninsula, generally from the east at 30 knots, seas as high as 15 feet there. Otherwise, winds generally from the east, 20 to 30 knots, seas as high as 8 feet just on the other side of the pack ice. For Aleutian chain, for Thursday, winds generally from the east or southeast, 25 to 30 knots there, seas as high as 16 feet, just south of Nikolsky. Otherwise, the western Aleutians look like they're going to be from the south at 40 knots, seas as high as 21 feet out there near Shimia and Kiska. And for Friday, winds generally from the east across the eastern Aleutians, 25 to 30 knots there, seas as high as 17 feet, just south of Unalaska. Otherwise, generally from the north or northwest at 20 knots as you get into the western Aleutians. For the west coast, winds generally from the south at 25 to 45 knots there along the pack ice on Thursday, even in the Norton Sound area, winds generally from the south at 30 knots. For Friday, winds continue out of the south or southeast, 30 to 35 knots, and seas just on the edge of the pack ice to 13 feet. For the Arctic coast, just off the Arctic coast there, winds generally from the south, 10 to 25 knots, northwest coast, looking at winds getting up to near hurricane force there, just off of Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, up to 60 knots there again. From the south, 45 knots as you get through the Bering Strait. And for Friday, Arctic coast looking at winds generally offshore from the southwest at 40 to 45 knots. Otherwise, through the Bering Strait and northwest coast, looking at winds from the south at 30 to 55 knots, storm force winds there, and even approaching hurricane force on the northwest coast there. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at, again, that low pressure system with a occluded front moving into the Bering Sea, scattered snow showers across the region, and that system moves closer on Thursday, and with big high pressure dominating the south.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.